When one thinks of the military, one thinks of precision and strategic knowledge. However, sometimes military decisions can be bad. In fact, they can be downright awful, resulting in terrible defeats. I'm Jake, the Voice Per, and here are 10 of the worst military decisions in history, from the ancient to the more recent. The defeat in 208 AD of the numerically superior forces of the northern Chinese warlord Cao Cao by the southern Chinese warlords Liu Bei and Su Quan was momentous. Also known as the Battle of Chibi, it has been cited as the largest naval battle in history. And the defeat was thanks to a spy who advised Cao Cao to chain all his ships together to prevent his soldiers from getting seasick. That rendered his ships as little more than sitting ducks for the opposing forces. The defeat of Cao Cao would eventually see the collapse of the once powerful Han Dynasty. This epic battle took place in 1187 between the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Muslim forces of the Ayyubid Sultan Salah al-Din, commonly known as Saladin. Saladin kept it simple. He made sure that the Crusaders would fight a battle in the middle of the desert without water. And the Crusaders, under King Guy of Lusignan, fell for it. The thirsty and demoralized Crusader forces were easily massacred by Saladin's troops. It would be a crushing defeat for the Crusaders and restore Islamic hegemony in the Holy Land. The Armada was Spain's formidable fleet of no less than 130 ships that set sail in August 1588. The intent was for Catholic Spain to invade Protestant England under Queen Elizabeth I. The Spanish, under the command of the Duke of Medina, made the catastrophic mistake of not destroying the English fleet at Plymouth. Such was the Duke's belief that his armada was so superior to what the English had. However, the armada proved too large and unwieldy, allowing the smaller English fleet to be more nimble. It was able to outmaneuver and eventually defeat the might of the Spanish Armada, and England remained Protestant. Napoleon Bonaparte has enjoyed many military successes since becoming emperor, making France the most wealthy and powerful country in Europe. But with success comes hubris, and it was in 1812 that Napoleon made a monumental blunder by deciding to invade Russia in the middle of winter. Soon the French troops became overwhelmed by the bitter cold, deep snow, and lack of food, and were forced to retreat. It was a huge victory for Imperial Russia, and was commemorated in Tchaikovsky's famous 1812 Overture Symphony. The Crimean War was the most bloody and vicious war between international powers in the 19th century. Possibly the war's most famous event was a case of the most pathetic and deadly miscommunication. During the Battle of Balaclava, Lord Cardigan was to have changed his light cavalry against the poorly armed Turkish forces, but he instead mistakenly made a charge at the far larger and better equipped Russian forces. The British cavalry forces were decimated, and the event was a national scandal back in Britain. Until 1836, Texas was under Mexican rule. The Texans revolted and a revolution ensued. The Alamo Mission, near what is modern-day San Antonio, was besieged for 13 days by Mexican troops under President General Antonio López de Santa. It was a vicious siege in which every Texan defender was killed. However, it allowed the Texans time to regroup and, filled with newfound rage, eventually beat the Mexican army. For the Mexicans under López de Santa, the Alamo was a clear example of winning the battle but losing the war. At the height of the mess that was World War I, Field Marshal Douglas Haig of the British Expeditionary Force, along with his French counterparts, decided that the best way to beat the Germans was by sheer bombardment. 1,723,873 rounds were fired, and the British bombardment could actually be heard in London in what was the largest use of artillery in history. However, the Germans were well aware of Haig's plan and had constructed various dugouts. The British had overestimated their artillery power, and 630,000 British and French soldiers were to die in the doomed offense. People tend to forget that Adolf Hitler and his Third Reich were winning the war until at least 1942. Hitler was so emboldened that he decided to fight the war on two fronts, splitting his army so that it could also invade the Soviet Union in the east. However, this proved to be a huge mistake, as the German troops were spread too thinly and struggled against the mighty resistance of the Soviets. The 1941 operation was not only a massive blunder on Hitler's part, it was certainly a turning point in the war against the Nazis. The 1961 attempted invasion of Cuba by a group of 1,400 paramilitaries must be considered one of the most idiotic military blunders in modern history. The effort to overthrow the communist Fidel Castro was crushed in just 3 days by the Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces. The fact that the motley crew invasion force was backed by the CIA did little for America's image in Latin America. All this failed invasion did was to strengthen Castro's support at home and drive a further dangerous wedge between the US and Soviet Union. The USSR decided to invade Afghanistan in December 1979 in an effort to install a puppet communist government in that country's capital, Kabul. The Soviet Union's 40th Army had been deployed and soon found itself mired in a war against fighting rebel forces. These Afghan rebels, who would soon become known as the Mujahideen, were trained in Pakistan and eventually armed by the US. The war dragged on until 1989, when Soviet forces were forced to retreat. The Afghan War was to be the Soviet Union's Vietnam, and contributed greatly to the eventual collapse of the USSR and the Soviet Empire. Those are some of the worst military blunders of all time. For more top lists just like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out our other top lists. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks for learning.